It was really, really beautiful pregnancy until the last few days. And we were just really let down. I think labour started with Ava on the Monday, but prior to that, keen to have her with us. I had opted to go for sweeps. So on the Friday before, which was 39 weeks plus two, went for a sweep, but I'd had like some liquid loss. Wasn't sure if my waters had gone and things like that. So my midwife sent me to Airedale for examination. She couldn't do it there. Um, and she measured me as well, and she was concerned about growth. And she said my bump seemed to have got smaller. So when referred to Airedale, I sent for a scan as well as being examined. So waters hadn't broken, they'd reported, and the sonographer detailed Ava having a growth spurt. So I was saying she were £8 one, which was quite an increase from the week before it being £7 four on the scan. So that put me in a little bit of panic. So I thought, oh heck, big baby. So went home after that and then started labour about 3 o'clock in the morning on the Monday, which were a shock. But we were due to be induced on the Wednesday, 41 weeks on the dot. So labour were progressing at home. When I'd been examined on the Friday, I was 2 centimetres dilated. And contractions were progressing from like every 20 minutes down to like 10 minutes, and kept in touch with the hospital every time, they sped up and things and lasting longer, and it was needed to be a minute and so many in so many minutes. So pen and paper came out and writing all those down. Just keen to get in and get her out, basically. So kind of probably not a normal thing, but willing the contractions to speed up and keep coming. Things carried on, and it was a little bit up and down over the first 24 hours or so, and then got a lot stronger, closer together. So again, another phone call to the hospital, and the goalposts changed again. So have to last for this long and so many in this minutes. To which point, living 30, 40 minutes away from hospital started to get a bit unnerving. That, are we leaving enough time to actually get there? So I expressed all this on the telephone calls, kept being told to go and have a bath, try and get some rest, take some paracetamol. I've not had a bath in 2.5 years. Can't bring myself to do it. I must have been in and out of that bath every 2 hours. So 48 hours had passed, and it was early hours of the morning. I sent Andrew, my husband, to bed. I was downstairs bouncing on the birthing ball, doing, singing, dancing, anything to, just try and get you through. And at this point, had no sleep, 48 hours. So you're overtired, you're exhausted. And then I started to feel quite concerned about, am I going to have the energy to actually do this when I do get there? Because I've not slept for 48 hours. So again, and I'd expressed all that to the midwife on the telephone as well. To which, try and relax and have a bath and have somebody rub your back and things like that. Yes, don't really help that much at that point. So when we did decide, it was us that decided to go into hospital. Pain between contractions was severe. Really, really painful. And when I spoke to the midwife on the phone, I said I had the urge to push, but I knew that I weren't dilated, and I knew it weren't ready to go, but I felt the urge to do it. So I went into hospital. and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, quite quiet, not many people about. I saw this midwife, and she put us in this room, and we must have been in there for about 15 minutes before she came back in. And then she asked me why I was obstetric led, which, with my folder in her hand, she asked me why. And I thought, well, you're holding my notes, you can see why. And we were classed as high risk. We were obstetric led all the way through the pregnancy due to previous pregnancy complications. I'd had an ectopic pregnancy a couple of years prior where my fallopian tube had been removed. So obviously this pregnancy was very special, very precious, very wanted. So after she had a look at the notes and questioned why I was high risk, as if it was I'd classed myself as that for some. I felt like I were being questioned, having me explain why have I got this special treatment from a consultant, which, to be quite honest, it wasn't really any different to any other treatment, I don't think. She examined me, and she tried to give me some tips on breathing through the contractions, which weren't very helpful. And then she asked me if I understood how it worked. And I thought, well, what do you mean? And she made gestures with her hand on, this is baby's head and this is your womb. And I felt so patronised, really condescending. And she said, I'm sorry if I'm being blunt, but I see this day in and day out, paranoid first-time mums. And I just thought, I've not done this before. I don't know what's normal and what's not, but something's telling me it's not right. That pain, and I feel like I do have quite a high pain threshold generally. I'm not really soft in that sense, but the pain was excruciating. I asked for pain relief, and she couldn't prescribe me anything because prescribing me something would have meant that I would need to be observed, and they weren't prepared to keep me in. So she said I could take paracetamol, which I had been doing, which obviously anybody can get paracetamol. And I said we were due in for the induction later that morning, but the day before, I'd received a telephone call from the hospital saying that we'd been moved to 41+1, which is outside the scope of somebody on high risk. You should be 41 maximum, that's it. So I did ask why we'd been moved, and they said they have a lot of high risk patients, and I wasn't high risk enough. So somebody else who was more high risk than me, and I do get there are certain levels of high risk categories, but high risk is still high risk. So at what point does somebody deem it not high risk? And that information should have been fed back to my consultant, and it should have been their decision, and a new plan should have been created, which should have been discussed with me. All this I've learned after the event, through the HCB investigation, where it's come to light that processes hadn't been followed, documents had not been completed, handovers had not been made, and the list goes on. So we were sent home after being examined, and that's it. So really, red flags would have been me asking for pain relief, the pain that I'd explained that I was in between contractions, and the fact that I was already high risk should have prompted a different course of action when we were in hospital that morning, but it didn't. So those red flags were ignored by that particular midwife. And then 12 hours later, 60 hours in labour, I saw some spotting. I've been wearing pads so that I could see if anything was going to happen. And there was some spotting. My mum was at home with me, so I explained it to her, and she said that sounds like fresh blood, which doesn't sound good. You know, my mum's had children. She's had experiences herself. So she said, we'll go in. So I said, right, okay. So went to go for a wee before I went and left the house, and that's when um, the eruption happened at home. And it was just like a waterfall. And I didn't know what it was. At that point, there weren't any pain. I didn't know where, if the blood was coming from me, if it was coming from Ava. I didn't know what it were. I didn't know anything about placental abruption, to be quite honest, before that, which makes me feel a little bit stupid and naive. But again, it's something that people don't talk about. Um, and I really think they should. Because if people were more aware of the signs, maybe I would have been more forceful about it. But the signs were there. The professionals should have recognised that. I put my life and my baby's life in their hands. I trusted their experience. So we headed to hospital, and I phoned twice to let them know that we were on our way, to which I was assured that somebody would be there to meet me. I explained the situation. Obviously, I've been in contact with them regularly over the past couple of days as contractions had increased. And, only 12 hours before we were actually there. Nobody was there to meet us at the entrance, and it's a buzzed door, so you have to be buzzed in to get in to the labour ward. So I rang the bell twice because nobody answered. And then when the doors did open, I walked myself to the labour ward. Nobody was there to meet me. My husband had gone to park the car, dropped me off as close to the doors as possible. And just getting onto the ward, a nurse came out and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm losing a lot of blood." And she said, "Oh, I was going to get you a wheelchair, but you seem to be doing okay." And I thought, me propping myself up against a wall, trying to walk to a ward constitutes as looking okay. Okay, and I didn't want to let this lady out of my sights because I didn't know where I was going, or, she was the "you're going to take me to help" sort of thing. So I didn't want her to leave to get a wheelchair because I'd have been on my own again. So she took me into the Mac suite and basically shouted out to the other midwives, "Is anybody expecting Amie?" And they all looked at each other like, "No, we don't know anything about it." And honestly, I couldn't believe it. And she said, "Right, well, we'll go through to labour ward again." So, which is another buzzed door. So you have to ring the buzzer, somebody answers the phone, asks who you are and what you're doing and why you need to get access. And it's such a long process. It's like so much time's being wasted. Finally got through to labour ward, and in a room, and another midwife came in, and she was very swift, very prompt, and got straight to it basically. And she said, "Right, let's have a look." She clipped whatever wires to me, monitoring me. She was so fast. She was brilliant, really. And she put the Doppler on and could hear Ava's heartbeat, but it was fading. And that's that's the first time I felt anybody expressed any concern after all these events. And she just said, right, I'm going to press this buzzer, and a lot of people are going to come into the room, and we're going to get you out to theatre, and we're going to get baby out. I just thought, just get her out. And she did, and it was seconds, and there must have been 15 people in the room. It was so quick. Um, so quick that my husband walked through the door of the room that I were in as I were being wheeled out to theatre. Um, I, I remember, I remember it all. But I thought that was last time I was going to see him. And I was quite prepared for that, so long as they got my baby out. So yeah, waking up in recovery and being told that she'd not survived was so far from what I expected. I didn't expect to wake up, to be honest, and I kind of came to peace with that, so long as she were going to be okay. So to have it the other way around, so it was before I'd even opened my eyes that this voice told me that she'd not survived. And they said, do you want to hold her? And I said, yeah, of course I do. I've been waiting so long to hold her. And she was beautiful. And all this time, Andrew's in a different room, and they didn't allow him to see her until I woke up, which must have been excruciating for him. He'd been told the news, and he weren't allowed to see her or me until I came out of recovery, which I think is absolutely diabolical, really. And then Andrew, bless him, was left to ring my parents, his parents, and start letting people know. All the while he's on his own and I'm still in recovery and we've not even spoken to each other yet. The next I saw Andrew when they took me back onto the ward, I held Ava to be wheeled back. And they put me back in the same room that I arrived in, which again I find really strange. Back on labour ward, back in the same room that I arrived in, where you can hear everything else that's going on, other ladies in labour, other babies crying, and I get wheeled through with my lifeless baby. And that's the first I saw Andrew. And my family had arrived at that point as well. And I remember just saying sorry. Not that I could have done anything about it, but I knew how much it would be hurting them as well. And we stayed in that room until the early hours the next morning because the bereavement suite wasn't ready, which makes you wonder, well, is it really being used that much? Because if it is, that's a problem. It wasn't, and I don't know what the delay was, but we stayed in the ward until the bereavement room was ready. All the while, Ava was in a cot next to me, which has a cold cot mattress to keep the body temperature down for obvious reasons. And the midwives kept coming in to check. And I mean, I'm out of it at this point with trauma just coming out of theatre and anaesthetic and things like that, and medication. It was all quite a blur. So I wasn't paying attention. I weren't paying attention to the machines and temperatures and things like that. But the midwives kept coming in to check and kept saying that it wasn't maintaining temperature. So three different cold cots were used, all of which were punctured. So the air was escaping, so the temperature wasn't maintaining. So Ava was deteriorating far faster than what she should have been. And those precious moments of being with your baby straight after birth, well, she's still pink and plump, and I should have had more of that. That's the most I could have hoped for at that time, and even that was taken away from us. So we did get moved into the bereavement suite about 2 o'clock in the morning. It's 12, just short of 12 hours after Ava had arrived. Ridiculous. I were tested for COVID, but yeah, Andrew wasn't. I was told we need to do a rapid COVID test because if anybody goes into that room who's got COVID, it'll need a full clean down afterwards. And I thought that's really not a concern right now. Do you know, bigger problems at this moment in time. But I had to be COVID tested, and Andrew didn't. And I do think part of it was trying to find some sort of reason for the events that had happened. A lot of things get put down to COVID, don't they, whether we like it or not. So that upset me, obviously. And strangely, the day after, there were people coming in and out, doctors, nurses, midwives. Nobody had been COVID tested. Half of them weren't even wearing a mask. So it seemed very odd, all this story about being COVID tested that caused all these delays, which just added to the trauma and the stress and, to an already difficult and tragic situation. I think a lot more could have been done to try and alleviate some of the pain at that point, but it wasn't. So that made everything all that much harder. When we did get into the bereavement suite, the things or the care that we received did start to get a little bit better. The bereavement midwives were absolutely fantastic, and they looked after us so well. And they took Ava for a handprints and her footprints to be done, and I got a cast of her prints as well, all of which, you don't have the mental capacity to even think about those things. So it was lovely that they could do that for us. And we had something, anything. We'd have taken anything that we could take with us and keep of her. So they were brilliant. We were informed that our case would go directly to HSIB. Due to the nature of the case, it wasn't that we were electing it or anything like that. It had to be reported to HSIB, and that was another difficult process, but interesting, traumatic, an opportunity to understand things a little bit more, I suppose, share my story, try and find some peace and some closure, I guess, in the hope that something will change, that some experiences will be better for other people, and learn from this tragedy and don't let it happen to somebody else. So I do hope that things will change. How much, I don't know. But starting the ball rolling with HSIB and going through detail, unfortunately, I had made quite a lot of notes and I had call history and things like that, because if I hadn't, the account from the hospital strangely was quite different to mine, and what they recalled and what I recalled didn't match up in a lot of senses. A lot of information wasn't recorded, processes weren't followed, handovers weren't made between midwives from shift to shift. Even the calls that I'd made early hours in the morning hadn't been recorded. So if I hadn't have had evidence of those call logs, it's literally your word against theirs. But you know what's right and what's real and what happened. You were there. Why would anybody need to lie about that? Is it not bad enough as it is? The truth is bad enough. Don't need to make anything up. So I just couldn't believe how much information seemed to go missing or wasn't recorded. That was quite astonishing, really. Things that should have been noted and passed on and escalated to my consultant because we were classed as high risk weren't. Decisions being made about moving the induction were made by people presumably not authorised to do it, because as I understand it, that should have only been signed off by my consultant. So HSIB do help you to understand where the failings were, and hopefully we'll try and enforce things to be done better. It's just happening all too often to too many people all over the country. It needs to change. So after getting home after the event, I couldn't go home straight away. I didn't feel like I could face it. And we had to make the decision to go home quite soon because of the cold course. Ava was deteriorating rapidly, not being kept at the right temperature. So we had to make the decision to let them take her to the mortuary. So that she would be kept at the right temperature, which, from what I understand, you should get at least 72 hours with your baby in that bereavement suite, undisturbed, that's the only time that you're going to get with them, It's precious. But sadly, we didn't have that. So we had to make that really difficult decision. And I didn't feel, well, we both didn't feel that we could be there in that room without her with us. It was just bizarre. So we made the decision to come home, but we went to my mum's. And that was strange and a hurdle. In the meantime, behind the scenes, my husband and my mum, bless them, had gone home and tidied the house, tidied the bathroom, tidied away all the baby paraphernalia. The Moses basket was in the living room and everything was there ready and set up for us to arrive home. So they'd sorted all that out and put it all in Ava's bedroom and shut the door so that I wasn't presented with all these things when I did eventually go home. And at my mum's, traumatic, disorientated, a lot of like anaesthetic, drugs and things like that. It's like an out-of-body experience. It's really strange. And I did have some not nice thoughts and feelings, and the pain, the heartache, the pain. And I did have a thought of putting an end to it, if you will. Very briefly, And I then, in the morning, had the discussion with Andrew and my mum, and I said, I don't feel safe and stable, and you're just going to have to keep your eye on me because I weren't feeling myself. And it scared me. That a very overwhelming desire to make the pain go away. It's something I'd never want to experience again, and I haven't, fortunately. But it is absolutely terrifying. So then we sought help, speak to the doctors. Can they put us in touch with a service? Where do we get some help? This, as much as, family try and be there for you and do things for you and say the right things. They're not professionals. They're not trained that way. It was quite clear that professionals were the only way forward. So my mum, bless her, made contact with the doctors, email, telephone call, explaining the situation, and they made some referrals. So I did get a few telephone numbers to ring and a couple of calls to myself from different services that asked me various questions, and having to explain it. There were one particular day I had 3 separate telephone calls with 3 different services explaining the situation, how I felt, what kind of support I thought. They're the experts asking me what I need. I'm like, I'm not, a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know what help. I'm telling you what my problem is. You tell me what help I need. Do you know what I mean? And it just seemed, all these services, if I wasn't imminently about to commit suicide, they couldn't help me. So, and I was, felt disregarded. It's like, oh, it's not severe enough because you're not on the verge of taking your own life, and that. It's like, how serious does it need to be before I can get some help? Do you know what I mean? Like, does it really need to get to that point? In the end, it was actually my midwife who looked after me, my community midwife. She came to see me at home, which she didn't have to do, and she did in her own time. And she came to visit me about 10 days after Ava, and she mentioned the Lancashire and Cumbria Reproductive Trauma Service, which I couldn't believe that the GPs hadn't suggested or made me aware of, and I didn't know about it. And from there, she sent a note through to the doctor. I phoned the doctor as well. So between us, managed to get a referral to this service, which it shouldn't take so much effort and searching and crying out for help to get it. But once on the system for the service, there was a waiting list. I did have contact from them, and there was a waiting list, and I was told. And now, having been through that process, I do understand that it does take time, and mine's taken 18 months, and they can't predict how long somebody's going to need that service for before they've spoken to them. So I do understand that, but there needs to be more resource for it. If people are having to wait 6 months just to get an appointment, there's definitely need for more people to provide this service. And to start with, it was counselling, and it were back to basics. It was doing a diary of logging what I'd eaten, how long I'd slept for, have I been outside, so that the counsellor could see what my day-to-day activities entailed, which wasn't a very lot at that point in time. I tended to lay in bed quite a lot, didn't really eat much, and I slept during the day because I was absolutely petrified of going to sleep at night. When everything went dark and quiet, that's when your mind takes over. But during the day, when it's bright and you can hear people outside and activity, it felt safer to go to sleep. And that's all to do with my experience of theatre and being put to sleep, and bright lights, loud noises, people shouting just before I was put to sleep. So, which I've only learned through the therapy. I wouldn't have been able to make that connection myself, I don't think. So counselling really just got me back up and about. I think it was about 3 months before I even stepped foot in a shop. I couldn't face going anywhere that somebody might know me. I couldn't face the looks, the pity eyes, as I call them. You know, people looking at you with that sympathy. I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. I didn't want that label, you know. Felt like I was walking around with a big flashing light above my head. And I know it's hard for other people as well, and they don't know what to say and how to react and how to behave with you. And I found myself quite a lot comforting other people, you know, letting them know that it's okay, you know. And it's a really, really hard thing for everybody to do. How to behave, how to acknowledge her. Do they ask how I am? Do they not? You know, because clearly I'm not doing very well, but it's one of those unspoken taboos, isn't it? But the more I did counselling, the more I ventured out, the more I started to process things. Probably made things easier for me, and I hope it made things easier for people around me as well. But having 3 months of counselling and back to basics of doing bits of meditation and, you know, to try and address flashbacks and unwanted thoughts and things like that. She taught me some good techniques and skills to be able to try and manage those so that it didn't completely write off my day. You know, I'd have one bad moment, one bad thought or flashback, and I'd go back to bed, I'd go and hide, I couldn't face anything. But she gave me tools and techniques to be able to ride through that emotion and that thought so that I could carry on with my day, whatever. It wasn't a lot, but whatever I were doing. And then it was another 6 months after that before I started psychiatric therapy, which is more in depth, and that was with the eye movement, the EMDR therapy. And that was just really interesting, really painful, really traumatic, but needed to be done. I couldn't move forward without it. There's no way I could have got myself back to any sense of normality without it. And I can't thank them enough. And they were absolutely brilliant. It's just sad and unfortunate how long it took, the waiting list, and how much you have to seek it out yourself. But once I did find the right service, and it was the right service for me, and that's what concerned me as well. If I started with a service and it didn't work, would it put me off and things like that? But fortunately, it was the right service. She was a brilliant therapist, and put a lot of work in with me and spent a lot of time with me and got me back to functioning, basically. I'm never going to be the same as what I was. It's a new me, and just have to figure out who that is and how to move forward with it, basically. But without them, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Unfortunately, there's very limited services for friends and family. My husband supported me so much through everything, and there were no no services for him, no help available for him. And I think it's diabolical, really, that the men are overlooked, the men aren't supported the same. And honestly, how he did what he did and got me through day after day without any support himself is amazing. But he can't be expected to do all that on his own. So I think that's definitely something that needs addressing, and there should be more of in the future. And I know, everybody deals with these things differently, and stereotypes about men and talking and things like that. But if it's happening so much, there's so many men out there that could talk to each other and share their stories and help and support each other. I just can't understand why there isn't more awareness about it.
Mm-hmm.
And HSIB are not there to what's the word? Attribute blame. They are there to fact find and point out any misconducts, and I suppose follow through with that and make sure things are put right. And that's what they're for, and that's their job to do that. But that wasn't enough for us. That the accountability wasn't enough, and so we sought yourselves. We wanted that admittance of failure. We wanted somebody to be accountable. We wanted somebody to acknowledge the failings and hold the hand up and take responsibility, because only then did we feel like changes would be made. And as hard as it is going through the process, if people don't talk about it, action won't be taken, changes won't be made, and it'll keep happening all the time. And we're just one story and one voice, but there's so many out there. And it does help the healing process, believe it or not. Finding justice, getting closure, and fighting for what you know is right, fighting for the truth. For that child that you love and that you've lost. And that's the only thing you can do for them then, because they're not here. So you just have to do whatever you can do to make it as right as possible for you. Take them to court and but you've got to find that balance between your own health and mental well-being and peace. And that's different for everybody.
Yeah.
And I do feel like, it's been a long process. It's been really hard. But you've been so sensitive and understanding, and you've made it as easy as possible for me, because I know if you could do it for me and take the pain away for me, I know you would. But obviously there's things that nobody can do for me, and I've had to do those things, but you've done as much as you possibly could to make it as easy as possible for me.